always looked sweet and happy when I have dreamed of her." The old lady made no reply to this, but wiping her eyes first, and her spectacles, which lay on the counterpane, afterwards, as if they were part and parcel of those features, brought some cool stuff for Oliver to drink, and then, patting him on the cheek, told him he must lie very quiet, or he would be ill again. So, Oliver kept very still, partly because he was anxious to obey the kind old lady in all things, and partly, to tell the truth, because he was completely exhausted with what he had already said. He soon fell into a gentle doze, from which he was awakened by the light of a candle, which, being brought near the bed, showed him a gentleman with a very large and loud ticking gold watch in his hand, who felt his pulse, and said he was a great deal better. "You are a great deal better, are you not, my dear?" said the gentleman. "Yes, thank you, sir," replied Oliver. "Yes, I know you are," said the gentleman. "You're hungry too, ain't you?" "No, sir," answered Oliver. "Hem," said the gentleman. "No, I know you're not." "He is not hungry, Mrs. Bedwin," said the gentleman, looking very wise. The old lady made a respectful inclination of the head, which seemed to say that she thought the doctor was a very clever man. The doctor appeared much of the same opinion himself. "You feel sleepy, don't you, my dear?" said the doctor. "No, sir," replied Oliver. "No," said the doctor, with a very shrewd and satisfied look. "You're not sleepy. Nor thirsty. Are you?" "Yes, sir, rather thirsty," answered Oliver. "Just as I expected, Mrs. Bedwin," said the doctor. "It's very natural that he should be thirsty. You may give him a little tea, ma'am, and some dry toast without any butter. Don't keep him too warm, ma'am, but be careful that you don't let him be too cold. Will you have the goodness?" The old lady dropped a curtsy. The doctor, after tasting the cool stuff, and expressing a qualified approval of it, hurried away, his boots creaking in a very important and wealthy manner as he went downstairs. Oliver dozed off again. Soon after this, when he awoke, it was nearly 12 o'clock. The old lady tenderly bade him good night shortly afterwards, and left him in charge of a fat old woman who had just come, bringing with her, in a little bundle, a small prayer book and a large nightcap. Putting the latter on her head and the former on the table, the old woman, after telling Oliver that she had come to sit up with him, drew her chair close to the fire and went off into a series of short naps, checkered at frequent intervals with sundry tumblings forward, and divers moans and chokings. These, however, had no worse effect than causing her to rub her nose very hard, and then fall asleep again. And thus the night crept slowly on. Oliver lay awake for some time, counting the little circles of light which the reflection of the rushlight shade threw upon the ceiling, or tracing with his languid eyes the intricate pattern of the paper on the wall. The darkness and the deep stillness of the room were very solemn, as they brought into the boy's mind the thought that death had been hovering there, for many days and nights, and might yet fill it with the gloom and dread of his awful presence. He turned his face upon the pillow, and fervently prayed to heaven. Gradually, he fell into that deep tranquil sleep which ease from recent suffering alone imparts, that calm and peaceful rest which it is pain to wake from. Who, if this were death, would be roused again to all the struggles and turmoils of life, to all its cares for the present, its anxieties for the future, more than all, its weary recollections of the past. It had been bright day, for hours, when Oliver opened his eyes. He felt cheerful and happy. The crisis of the disease was safely past. He belonged to the world again. In 3 days' time he was able to sit in an easy chair, well propped up with pillows, and, as he was still too weak to walk, Mrs. Bedwin had him carried downstairs into the little housekeeper's room, which belonged to her. Having him set, here, by the fireside, the good old lady sat herself down too, and, being in a state of considerable delight at seeing him so much better, forthwith began to cry most violently. "Never mind me, my dear," said the old lady, "I'm only having a regular good cry." There, it's all over now, and I'm quite comfortable. You're very, very kind to me, ma'am, said Oliver. Well, never you mind that, my dear, said the old lady, that's got nothing to do with your broth, and it's full time you had it, for the doctor says Mr. Brownlow may come in to see you this morning, and we must get up our best looks, because the better we look, the more he'll be pleased. And with this, the old lady applied herself to warming up, in a little saucepan, a basin full of broth, strong enough, Oliver thought, to furnish an ample dinner, when reduced to the regulation strength, for 350 paupers, at the lowest computation. Are you fond of pictures, dear? Inquired the old lady, seeing that Oliver had fixed his eyes, most intently, on a portrait which hung against the wall, just opposite his chair. I don't quite know, ma'am, said Oliver, without taking his eyes from the canvas. I have seen so few that I hardly know. What a beautiful, mild face that lady's is. Ah, said the old lady, painters always make ladies out prettier than they are, or they wouldn't get any custom, child. The man that invented the machine for taking likenesses might have known that would never succeed. It's a deal too honest. A deal, said the old lady, laughing very heartily at her own acuteness. Is that a likeness, ma'am? Said Oliver. Yes, said the old lady, looking up for a moment from the broth, that's a portrait. Whose, ma'am? Asked Oliver. Why, really, my dear, I don't know, answered the old lady in a good-humored manner. It's not a likeness of anybody that you or I know, I expect. It seems to strike your fancy, dear. It is so pretty, replied Oliver. Why, sure you're not afraid of it, said the old lady, observing in great surprise, the look of awe with which the child regarded the painting. Oh no, no, returned Oliver quickly, but the eyes look so sorrowful, and where I sit, they seem fixed upon me. It makes my heart beat, added Oliver in a low voice, as if it was alive, and wanted to speak to me, but couldn't. Lord save us, exclaimed the old lady, starting, don't talk in that way, child. You're weak and nervous after your illness. Let me wheel your chair round to the other side, and then you won't see it. There, said the old lady, suiting the action to the word, you don't see it now, at all events. Oliver did see it in his mind's eye as distinctly as if he had not altered his position, but he thought it better not to worry the kind old lady, so he smiled gently when she looked at him, and Mrs. Bidwin, satisfied that he felt more comfortable, salted and broke bits of toasted bread into the broth, with all the bustle befitting so solemn a preparation. Oliver got through it with extraordinary expedition. He had scarcely swallowed the last spoonful, when there came a soft rap at the door. Come in, said the old lady, and in walked Mr. Brownlow. Now, the old gentleman came in as brisk as need be, but he had no sooner raised his spectacles on his forehead, and thrust his hands behind the skirts of his dressing-gown to take a good long look at Oliver, than his countenance underwent a very great variety of odd contortions. Oliver looked very worn and shadowy from sickness, and made an ineffectual attempt to stand up, out of respect to his benefactor, which terminated in his sinking back into the chair again, and the fact is, if the truth must be told, that Mr. Brownlow's heart, being large enough for any 6 ordinary old gentlemen of humane disposition, forced a supply of tears into his eyes, by some hydraulic process which we are not sufficiently philosophical to be in a condition to explain. Poor boy, said Mr. Brownlow, clearing his throat. I'm rather hoarse this morning, Mrs. Bidwin. I'm afraid I have caught cold. I hope not, sir, said Mrs. Bidwin. Everything you have had, has been well aired, sir. I don't know, Bidwin. I don't know, said Mr. Brownlow. I rather think I had a damp napkin at dinner time yesterday, but never mind that. How do you feel, my dear? Very happy, sir, replied Oliver. And very grateful indeed, sir, for your goodness to me. Good boy, said Mr. Brownlow, stoutly. Have you given him any nourishment, Bedwin? Any slops, eh? He has just had a basin of beautiful strong broth, sir, replied Mrs. Bedwin, drawing herself up slightly, and laying strong emphasis on the last word, to intimate that between slops, and broth well compounded, there existed no affinity or connection whatsoever. Ugh, said Mr. Brownlow, with a slight shudder, a couple of glasses of port wine would have done him a great deal more good. Wouldn't they, Tom White, eh? My name is Oliver, sir, replied the little invalid with a look of great astonishment. Oliver, said Mr. Brownlow, Oliver what? Oliver White, eh? No, sir, Twist, Oliver Twist. Queer name, said the old gentleman. What made you tell the magistrate your name was White? I never told him so, sir, returned Oliver in amazement. This sounded so like a falsehood, that the old gentleman looked somewhat sternly in Oliver's face. It was impossible to doubt him, there was truth in every one of its thin and sharpened lineaments. Some mistake, said Mr. Brownlow. But, although his motive for looking steadily at Oliver no longer existed, the old idea of the resemblance between his features and some familiar face came upon him so strongly, that he could not withdraw his gaze. I hope you are not angry with me, sir, said Oliver, raising his eyes beseechingly. No, no, replied the old gentleman. Why? What's this? Bedwin, look there. As he spoke, he pointed hastily to the picture over Oliver's head, and then to the boy's face. There was its living copy. The eyes, the head, the mouth, every feature was the same. The expression was, for the instant, so precisely alike, that the minutest lines seemed copied with startling accuracy. Oliver knew not the cause of this sudden exclamation, for, not being strong enough to bear the start it gave him, he fainted away. A weakness on his part, which affords the narrative an opportunity of relieving the reader from suspense, in behalf of the two young pupils of the merry old gentleman, and of recording, that when the Dodger, and his accomplished friend Master Bates, joined in the hue and cry which was raised at Oliver's heels, in consequence of their executing an illegal conveyance of Mr. Brownlow's personal property, as has been already described, they were actuated by a very laudable and becoming regard for themselves, and forasmuch as the freedom of the subject and the liberty of the individual are among the first and proudest boasts of a true-hearted Englishman, so, I need hardly beg the reader to observe, that this action should tend to exalt them in the opinion of all public and patriotic men, in almost as great a degree as this strong proof of their anxiety for their own preservation and safety goes to corroborate and confirm the little code of laws which certain profound and sound-judging philosophers have laid down as the mainsprings of all nature's deeds and actions, the said philosophers very wisely reducing the good lady's proceedings to matters of maxim and theory, and, by a very neat and pretty compliment to her exalted wisdom and understanding, putting entirely out of sight any considerations of heart, or generous impulse and feeling. For, these are matters totally beneath a female who is acknowledged by universal admission to be far above the numerous little foibles and weaknesses of her sex. If I wanted any further proof of the strictly philosophical nature of the conduct of these young gentlemen in their very delicate predicament, I should at once find it in the fact, also recorded in a foregoing part of this narrative, of their quitting the pursuit, when the general attention was fixed upon Oliver, and making immediately for their home by the shortest possible cut. Although I do not mean to assert that it is usually the practice of renowned and learned sages, to shorten the road to any great conclusion, their course indeed being rather to lengthen the distance, by various circumlocutions and discursive staggerings, like unto those in which drunken men under the pressure of a too mighty flow of ideas, are prone to indulge, still, I do mean to say, and do say distinctly, that it is the invariable practice of many mighty philosophers, in carrying out their theories, to evince great wisdom and foresight in providing against every possible contingency which can be supposed at all likely to affect themselves. Thus, to do a great right, you may do a little wrong, and you may take any means which the end to be attained, will justify, the amount of the right, or the amount of the wrong, or indeed the distinction between the two, being left entirely to the philosopher concerned, to be settled and determined by his clear, comprehensive, and impartial view of his own particular case. It was not until the two boys had scoured, with great rapidity, through a most intricate maze of narrow streets and courts, that they ventured to halt beneath a low and dark archway. Having remained silent here, just long enough to recover breath to speak, Master Bates uttered an exclamation of amusement and delight, and, bursting into an uncontrollable fit of laughter, flung himself upon a doorstep, and rolled thereon in a transport of mirth. "What's the matter?" inquired the Dodger. "Ha! Ha! Ha!" roared Charley Bates. "Hold your noise," remonstrated the Dodger, looking cautiously round. "Do you want to be grabbed, stupid?" "I can't help it," said Charley, "I can't help it." To see him splitting away at that pace, and cutting round the corners, and knocking up again the posts, and starting on again as if he was made of iron as well as them, and me with the wipe in my pocket, singing out arter him, oh, my eye. The vivid imagination of Master Bates presented the scene before him in too strong colors. As he arrived at this apostrophe, he again rolled upon the doorstep, and laughed louder than before. "What'll Fagin say?" inquired the Dodger, taking advantage of the next interval of breathlessness on the part of his friend to propound the question. "What?" repeated Charley Bates. "Ah, what?" said the Dodger. "Why, what should he say?" inquired Charley, stopping rather suddenly in his merriment, for the Dodger's manner was impressive. "What should he say?" Mr. Dawkins whistled for a couple of minutes, then, taking off his hat, scratched his head, and nodded thrice. "What do you mean?" said Charley. "Tour rul lol loo, gammon and spinach, the frog he wouldn't, and high cockalorum," said the Dodger, with a slight sneer on his intellectual countenance. This was explanatory, but not satisfactory. Master Bates felt it so, and again said, "What do you mean?" The Dodger made no reply, but putting his hat on again, and gathering the skirts of his long-tailed coat under his arm, thrust his tongue into his cheek, slapped the bridge of his nose some half-dozen times in a familiar but expressive manner, and turning on his heel, slunk down the court. Master Bates followed, with a thoughtful countenance. The noise of footsteps on the creaking stairs, a few minutes after the occurrence of this conversation, roused the merry old gentleman as he sat over the fire with a saveloy and a small loaf in his hand, a pocket-knife in his right, and a pewter pot on the trivet. There was a rascally smile on his white face as he turned round, and looking sharply out from under his thick red eyebrows, bent his ear towards the door, and listened. "Why, how's this?" muttered the Jew, changing countenance, "only two of them? Where's the third? They can't have got into trouble. Hark!" The footsteps approached nearer, they reached the landing. The door was slowly opened, and the Dodger and Charley Bates entered, closing it behind them. Chapter 13. Some new acquaintances are introduced to the intelligent reader, connected with whom various pleasant matters are related, appertaining to this history. "Where's Oliver?" said the Jew, rising with a menacing look. "Where's the boy?" The young thieves eyed their preceptor as if they were alarmed at his violence, and looked uneasily at each other. But they made no reply. "What's become of the boy?" said the Jew, seizing the Dodger tightly by the collar, and threatening him with horrid imprecations. "Speak out, or I'll throttle you." "Mr. Fagin looked so very much in earnest, that Charley Bates, who deemed it prudent in all cases to be on the safe side, and who conceived it by no means improbable that it might be his turn to be throttled second, dropped upon his knees, and raised a loud, well-sustained, and continuous roar, something between a mad bull and a speaking trumpet. "Will you speak?" thundered the Jew, shaking the Dodger so much that his keeping in the big coat at all seemed perfectly miraculous. "Why, the traps have got him, and that's all about it," said the Dodger, sullenly. "Come, let go o' me, will you?" And, swinging himself, at one jerk, clean out of the big coat, which he left in the Jew's hands, the Dodger snatched up the toasting fork, and made a pass at the merry old gentleman's waistcoat, which, if it had taken effect, would have let a little more merriment out than could have been easily replaced. The Jew stepped back in this emergency, with more agility than could have been anticipated in a man of his apparent decrepitude, and, seizing up the pot, prepared to hurl it at his assailant's head. But Charlie Bates, at this moment, calling his attention by a perfectly terrific howl, he suddenly altered its destination, and flung it full at that young gentleman. "Why, what the blazes is in the wind now?" growled a deep voice. "Who pitched that air at me? It's the beer, and not the pot, as hit me, or I'd have settled somebody. I might have knowed, as nobody but an infernal, rich, plundering, thundering old Jew could afford to throw away any drink but water, and not that, unless he done the river company every quarter. What's it all about, Fagin? Me, if my neck-handkercher ain't lined with beer. Come in, you sneaking warmint, what are you stopping outside for, as if you was ashamed of your master? Come in." The man who growled out these words, was a stoutly built fellow of about 35, in a black velveteen coat, very soiled drab breeches, lace-up half-boots, and grey cotton stockings which enclosed a bulky pair of legs, with large swelling calves, the kind of legs, which in such costume, always look in an unfinished and incomplete state without a set of fetters to garnish them. He had a brown hat on his head, and a dirty Belcher handkerchief round his neck, with the long frayed ends of which he smeared the beer from his face as he spoke. He disclosed, when he had done so, a broad heavy countenance with a beard of 3 days' growth, and 2 scowling eyes, one of which displayed various party-colored symptoms of having been recently damaged by a blow. "Come in, d'ye hear?" growled this engaging ruffian. A white shaggy dog, with his face scratched and torn in 20 different places, skulked into the room. "Why didn't you come in afore?" said the man. "You're getting too proud to own me afore company, are you? Lie down." This command was accompanied with a kick, which sent the animal to the other end of the room. He appeared well used to it, however, for he coiled himself up in a corner very quietly, without uttering a sound, and winking his very ill-looking eyes 20 times in a minute, appeared to occupy himself in taking a survey of the apartment. "What are you up to? Ill-treating the boys, you covetous, avaricious, insatiably old fence," said the man, seating himself deliberately. "I wonder they don't murder you. I would if I was them. If I'd been your apprentice, I'd have done it long ago, and, no, I couldn't have sold you afterwards, for you're fit for nothing but keeping as a curiosity of ugliness in a glass bottle, and I suppose they don't blow glass bottles large enough." "Hush! Hush! Mr. Sykes," said the Jew, trembling, "don't speak so loud." "None of your mistering," replied the ruffian, "you always mean mischief when you come that. You know my name, out with it. I shan't disgrace it when the time comes." Well, then, Bill Sykes," said the Jew, with abject humility. "You seem out of humor, Bill." "Perhaps I am," replied Sykes. "I should think you was rather out of sorts too, unless you mean as little harm when you throw pewter pots about, as you do when you blab in. Are you mad?" said the Jew, catching the man by the sleeve, and pointing towards the boys. Mr. Sykes contented himself with tying an imaginary knot under his left ear, and jerking his head over on the right shoulder, a piece of dumb show which the Jew appeared to understand perfectly. He then, in cant terms, with which his whole conversation was plentifully besprinkled, but which would be quite unintelligible if they were recorded here, demanded a glass of liquor. "And mind you don't poison it," said Mr. Sykes, laying his hat upon the table. This was said in jest, but if the speaker could have seen the evil leer with which the Jew bit his pale lip as he turned round to the cupboard, he might have thought the caution not wholly unnecessary, or the wish, at all events, to improve upon the distiller's ingenuity not very far from the old gentleman's merry heart. After swallowing 2 of 3 glasses of spirits, Mr. Sikes condescended to take some notice of the young gentleman, which gracious act led to a conversation, in which the cause and manner of Oliver's capture were circumstantially detailed, with such alterations and improvements on the truth, as to the Dodger appeared most advisable under the circumstances. "I'm afraid," said the Jew, "that he may say something which will get us into trouble." "That's very likely," returned Sikes with a malicious grin. "You're blowed upon, Fagin. And I'm afraid, you see," added the Jew, speaking as if he had not noticed the interruption, and regarding the other closely as he did so, "I'm afraid that, if the game was up with us, it might be up with a good many more, and that it would come out rather worse for you than it would for me, my dear." The man started, and turned round upon the Jew. But the old gentleman's shoulders were shrugged up to his ears, and his eyes were vacantly staring on the opposite wall. There was a long pause. Every member of the respectable coterie appeared plunged in his own reflections, not excepting the dog, who by a certain malicious licking of his lips seemed to be meditating an attack upon the legs of the first gentleman or lady he might encounter in the streets when he went out. "Somebody must find out what's been done at the office," said Mr. Sikes in a much lower tone than he had taken since he came in. The Jew nodded assent. "If he hasn't peached, and is committed, there's no fear till he comes out again," said Mr. Sikes, "and then he must be taken care on. You must get hold of him somehow." Again the Jew nodded. The prudence of this line of action, indeed, was obvious, but, unfortunately, there was one very strong objection to its being adopted. This was, that the Dodger, and Charlie Bates, and Fagin, and Mr. William Sikes, happened, one and all, to entertain a violent and deeply rooted antipathy to going near a police office on any ground or pretext whatever. How long they might have sat and looked at each other, in a state of uncertainty not the most pleasant of its kind, it is difficult to guess. It is not necessary to make any guesses on the subject, however, for the sudden entrance of the 2 young ladies whom Oliver had seen on a former occasion, caused the conversation to flow afresh. "The very thing," said the Jew. "Bet we'll go, won't you, my dear?" "Where's?" inquired the young lady. "Only just up to the office, my dear," said the Jew coaxingly. It is due to the young lady to say that she did not positively affirm that she would not, but that she merely expressed an emphatic and earnest desire to be blessed, if she would, a polite and delicate evasion of the request, which shows the young lady to have been possessed of that natural good breeding which cannot bear to inflict upon a fellow creature the pain of a direct and pointed refusal. The Jew's countenance fell. He turned from this young lady, who was gaily, not to say gorgeously attired, in a red gown, green boots, and yellow curl papers, to the other female. "Nancy, my dear," said the Jew in a soothing manner, "what do you say?" "That it won't do, so it's no use trying it on, Fagin," replied Nancy. "What do you mean by that?" said Mr. Sikes, looking up in a surly manner. "What I say, Bill," replied the lady collectedly. "Why, you're just the very person for it," reasoned Mr. Sikes. "Nobody about here knows anything of you." "And as I don't want them to, neither," replied Nancy in the same composed manner, "it's rather more no than yes with me, Bill." "She'll go, Fagin," said Sikes. "No, she won't, Fagin," said Nancy. "Yes, she will, Fagin," said Sikes. And Mr. Sikes was right. By dint of alternate threats, promises, and bribes, the lady in question was ultimately prevailed upon to undertake the commission. She was not, indeed, withheld by the same considerations as her agreeable friend, for, having recently removed into the neighborhood of Field Lane from the remote but genteel suburb of Ratcliffe, she was not under the same apprehension of being recognized by any of her numerous acquaintances. Accordingly, with a clean white apron tied over her gown, and her curl papers tucked up under a straw bonnet, both articles of dress being provided from the Jew's inexhaustible stock, Miss Nancy prepared to issue forth on her errand. "Stop a minute, my dear," said the Jew, producing a little covered basket. "Carry that in one hand. It looks more respectable, my dear." "Give her a door key to carry in her t'other one, Fagin," said Sikes, "it looks real and genuine-like." "Yes, yes, my dear, so it does," said the Jew, hanging a large street door key on the forefinger of the young lady's right hand. "There, very good. Very good indeed, my dear," said the Jew, rubbing his hands. "Oh, my brother! My poor, dear, sweet, innocent little brother," exclaimed Nancy, bursting into tears, and wringing the little basket and the street door key in an agony of distress. "What has become of him? Where have they taken him to? Oh, do have pity, and tell me what's been done with the dear boy, gentlemen, do, gentlemen, if you please, gentlemen." Having uttered those words in a most lamentable and heart-broken tone, to the immeasurable delight of her hearers, Miss Nancy paused, winked to the company, nodded smilingly round, and disappeared. "Ah, she's a clever girl, my dears," said the Jew, turning round to his young friends, and shaking his head gravely, as if in mute admonition to them to follow the bright example they had just beheld. "She's a honor to her sex," said Mr. Sikes, filling his glass, and smiting the table with his enormous fist. "Here's her health," and wishing they was all like her. While these, and many other encomiums, were being passed on the accomplished Nancy, that young lady made the best of her way to the police office, whither, notwithstanding a little natural timidity consequent upon walking through the streets alone and unprotected, she arrived in perfect safety shortly afterwards. Entering by the back way, she tapped softly with the key at one of the cell doors, and listened. There was no sound within, so she coughed and listened again. Still there was no reply, so she spoke. "Nolly, dear," murmured Nancy in a gentle voice, "Nolly?" There was nobody inside but a miserable shoeless criminal, who had been taken up for playing the flute, and who, the offense against society having been clearly proved, had been very properly committed by Mr. Fong to the House of Correction for 1 month, with the appropriate and